This video is brought to you by Global Men's Wellness, your 24/7 AI health expert. No copays, waiting rooms, or awkward conversations. Just real answers whenever you need them. Visit globalmenswellness.com to try it free and get your own on-demand concierge-level wellness expert today.
Welcome to the 21st Century Man podcast. We're really glad you could join us for another deep dive.
Yeah, good to be here. In these sessions, we really try to unpack the insights from the book, The 21st Century Man.
Exactly. It's such a transformative book, and each deep dive we do focuses on a specific chapter, pulling out those key bits of knowledge.
The stuff that helps you navigate, modern life, which is getting pretty complex.
It really is. And today we're tackling a chapter that's incredibly important, but also, frankly, quite sobering.
That's true. We're diving into chapter 65, which is titled Diseases of Despair. It's authored by Judson, Brandeis, MD, and Michael LaBassian, MPH.
And the core mission of this chapter really is to look squarely at some genuinely alarming trends in mortality.
Yeah, specifically the unexpected and tragic rise in deaths from suicide, drug overdose, and alcoholic liver disease.
It forces us to look past the headlines, doesn't it? To really try and understand what's going on beneath the surface and, well, particularly American society here.
Precisely. And we want to stress, this isn't just about listing off stark statistics, although we will cover some of those.
No, absolutely not. This deep dive, fundamentally, it's about what you, our listener, really need to be aware of, what you need to grasp to protect yourself.
And not just yourself, but the people around you, the people you care about.
Right. This isn't abstract knowledge. It's vital, practical wisdom, really carefully pulled from real data and expert views.
And it's directly relevant to the challenges and maybe even the opportunities that men are facing right now in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And, the whole book, The 21st Century Man, is just packed with this kind of direct, relevant, powerful insight.
It really is. It serves as this incredibly thorough guide to understanding and hopefully addressing the unique physical, mental, social challenges that modern men encounter.
We genuinely encourage you to pick up the book itself. Our deep dives, they give you a concentrated look, chapter by chapter.
But the book itself provides that incredible foundational framework.
Right.
It helps you live a more informed, resilient, and ultimately, a more empowered life.
It's an investment, really, an investment in understanding yourself and the world that's changing around us.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's start maybe by grounding this. Let's unpack this with a story, because sometimes the data, no matter how shocking, it just doesn't quite hit home until you see the human impact.
That's so true, the personal side of it.
Yeah. So the authors, they start this chapter by introducing us to a man named Richard. Richard was 59, lived in North Carolina.
He'd been an HVAC technician since he was just 16 years old, a lifetime in that trade.
Dedicated his life to it, worked in the business with his father even,
Right.
Placing AC units all over his community.
And he was, by all accounts, a real family man. Proud dad, 2 sons, Jake and Daniel, and a daughter, Jessica.
His wife, Nancy, she was an elementary school teacher, 25 years in the classroom, a dedicated partner.
Richard had made an honest living, just sheer hard work. And his biggest source of pride, putting all 3 kids through college.
Yeah, he was especially looking forward to his youngest daughter, Jessica, graduating from the University of Florida. That was coming up soon.
They were both kind of on the edge of retirement, weren't they? Dreaming of that rest after decades of hard physical labor.
Exactly, that well-earned rest. But what's truly heartbreaking, and what the chapter details so vividly, is how quickly that vision, that stability they'd worked for.
Yeah, how it all started to unravel for Richard and Nancy.
It began with a really devastating blow. They lost their home to foreclosure during the Great Recession back in 2007.
And that wasn't just, losing money or a house. It was deeper than that. It was emotional, a hit to their security, their identity.
A trauma, really, a deeply personal trauma that just echoed for years.
And it wasn't like it was just one bad event he could bounce back from easily, was it?
No, not at all. The book really emphasizes the relentless financial pressure that just continued, raising 3 kids, especially putting them through college.
That costs a fortune. And the pressure, economic and emotional, it landed squarely on Richard's shoulders, didn't it, as the primary breadwinner?
Totally. And that dream of retirement, it started to feel less like a dream and more like, a source of constant worry, a gnawing anxiety.
Did they afford it? Would they be okay?
Exactly. And the fallout from the foreclosure, plus other money problems, it just made it so hard for him to ever feel like he was getting ahead again, financially or, emotionally.
But constantly swimming upstream. fighting against something he couldn't really control.
Yeah. And what often follows that kind of intense, prolonged stress?
A decline in health,
Yeah,
both physical and mental.
right. Richard was dealing with diabetes, high blood pressure, and progressive arthritis.
And that arthritis must have been made so much worse by the physical demands of being an HVAC tech. Lifting units, crawling in tight spaces.
Every day, his job, which used to be a source of pride, was becoming a source of actual physical pain.
Meanwhile, his wife, Nancy, she started noticing something else. His drinking.
Yeah, she saw him drinking more, and she was getting really concerned. Palpably concerned, the book says.
And she had a difficult comparison point, didn't she? Her own mother had struggled with alcohol addiction.
Exactly. So she saw these patterns, these warning signs, and she desperately hoped Richard wouldn't go down that same path.
It's that classic awful scenario. She tries to talk to him, out of love, out of desperation.
She did, tried to get him to seek help, to face the issues, but the conversations just, they hit a wall.
He'd brush it off, get defensive.
Yeah. Promised he'd turn things around, even though he was about 50 pounds overweight and clearly struggling. He'd insist he was in good health.
Even boasted he looked better than his friends. That's textbook denial, isn't it?
It is. And maybe also that ingrained cultural thing, you know? Men are supposed to be tough, handle it themselves, not show weakness.
Right. That stoicism that can be so damaging. It creates a barrier that even a loving partner like Nancy just couldn't break through.
So tragically, as the months went by, Richard's drinking, his dependence on alcohol, it wasn't just noticeable anymore, it became undeniable.
The conflict at home must have been intense. The tension, the distress for Nancy, for the kids.
It reached a boiling point, and then the devastating final outcome, just 2 weeks before Jessica's graduation.
Oh no, the graduation he was so looking forward to.
The one he'd worked his whole life for, in many ways. Nancy found him, collapsed, unresponsive on the bathroom floor.
And there was a broken whiskey bottle beside him.
Yeah, just gut-wrenching.
It really drives home the individual tragedy behind this whole concept of diseases of despair. But the book says his story isn't unique, right? It's becoming more common.
That's the terrifying part. An ambulance rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late.
The ER doctor pronounced him dead that night.
Cause of death listed as suicide by alcohol poisoning. And Richard's story, as personal and tragic as it is, the chapter clearly states it's increasingly common in the United States.
So it serves as this powerful, really stark illustration of this modern epidemic, what the authors call diseases of despair.
Exactly. His struggle, his death, it sets the stage for understanding the bigger picture, the broader trends, and the data.
It makes you ask, how many other Richards are out there right now?
It really does, because when you do step back and look at those national trends, it's just as alarming, maybe even more so.
We tend to think of progress as, life expectancy always going up, medical breakthroughs, public health getting better.
Right. So it's a real shock, a profound shock, to learn that U.S. life expectancy actually started to flatten out around 2010.
And then, even worse, it actually started to decline between 2014 and 2017.
That just flies in the face of everything we expect, doesn't it? It's like reversing generations of progress.
It is. And what's really crucial, what makes this so unsettling, is why it's declining. It's not the traditional causes we've been fighting for decades.
Yeah, we're not seeing a big jump in deaths from cancer or heart disease or even car accidents, which used to be major drivers.
No. The real drivers are, they're more insidious. They reveal this darker, more complex issue in society, kind of deep distress.
And here's the gut punch the chapter delivers. The true drivers behind this decline are this extraordinary, alarming rise in suicides.
An absolute explosion in drug overdoses.
Yeah.
Especially involving opioids.
And a significant tragic increase in deaths from alcoholic liver disease.
These are the diseases of despair.
Which brings us to that really pivotal research, the work by economists Ann Case and Angus Deaton from Princeton.
Yeah, their 2015 report was groundbreaking. They didn't just coin the term diseases of despair, they fundamentally shifted how we understand mortality today.
How so?
Well, their core insight was that these deaths, suicide, overdoses, liver disease, weren't just isolated tragedies or individual health failures. They were symptoms.
Symptoms of a deeper societal sickness.
Exactly. A despair that was literally killing specific groups of Americans. It was a massive wake-up call.
Telling us to look beyond just traditional disease drivers and examine the social and economic fabric of people's lives.
Right. Their work shone a light on a crisis that was kind of invisible in the overall statistics before then. They identified a specific group, that was suffering disproportionately.
Middle-aged white Americans, especially those with limited education and fewer job opportunities.
That was their key finding, that this specific demographic was experiencing an epidemic of deaths due to suicides and stress-related disorders.
And the numbers they found, which the chapter lays out, they really back this up. The speed at which this escalated is frightening.
It really is. Between 2000 and 2017, the death rate from these specific stress-related conditions literally doubled.
Doubled. From 22.7 people per 100,000 up to 45.8 per 100,000.
That's not a small jump. There's a full-blown crisis unfolding right under our noses.
And the disparities, when you break it down further, are even more stark, aren't they?
They are. Between 1999 and 2013, the mortality rate for white non-Hispanic Americans rose significantly by 34 per 100,000.
But during that same period, mortality rates for other groups, like Black Americans and Hispanic Americans, actually improved.
Which raises a really critical question. Why? Why this concentrated, alarming impact within this particular group?
Understanding that trend, digging into the underlying issues, looking at the specific vulnerabilities, that's essential if we want to help people address these risks.
Absolutely. It's not about assigning blame. It's about targeted awareness and finding effective interventions, recognizing where the pain is most acute.
And that awareness, that understanding, it needs to extend to another major factor, one that often operates silently but is incredibly powerful: chronic pain.
Yes, we're seeing a huge increase in chronic conditions generally in the U.S. People are living longer, which is good.
But they're often living longer with various chronic diseases, and a big one is chronic pain.
The sheer scale of it is mind-boggling. Yeah. Nearly 50 million adults in the U.S. deal with painful conditions lasting at least 3 months.
50 million. That's staggering.
And it gets worse. Over 20 million adults suffer from chronic pain that actively, significantly interferes with their daily lives, their work.
So it's not just a nuisance, it's debilitating. It erodes your quality of life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And crucially, certain groups are more susceptible. Older adults, veterans.
Veterans, yeah. Carrying physical and often psychological wounds.
And people living in rural areas, people in high-poverty communities. Disturbingly, these often overlap with the demographics most affected by the diseases of despair.
Creating this tragic feedback loop. Pain leads to despair. Despair can worsen pain.
Precisely, and the chapter is very clear. Deaths linked to these conditions often come from this profound desire to just escape.
Escape the overwhelming emotional anguish, or the relentless physical pain, or often both. It's an act more of pure desperation.
It's that dual nature of pain. You've got the physical side, which is increasing partly due to poor health, less activity, just aging.
The body wearing down under stress.
Right. But then there's the emotional stress, the mental anguish, which can be just as crippling, if not more so.
And this isn't just vague unhappiness. It's rooted in real life-altering circumstances.
Exactly. The chapter lists them. Lost economic opportunity, a business failing, bankruptcy wiping you out, losing your home or farm like Richard.
That direct link back to his story.
And then the erosion of social connections, family ties breaking down. When those foundations crumble, the emotional pain can be immense.
Leading people to search desperately for any kind of escape hatch.
And the cost of just the pain aspect is enormous, not even counting the despair yet.
Just the economic cost of chronic pain management in the U.S., the chapter puts it at $635 billion annually.
$635 billion.
Yeah.
That's more than the defense budget of many countries.
Yeah.
A massive drain on healthcare, on productivity.
And that huge number, it doesn't even begin to capture the human cost, does it?
Not even close.
Yeah.
The quiet suffering, the lost potential, the emotional toll on families watching loved ones struggle. It's immeasurable.
It reverberates through society, affecting communities, workplaces, everything.
And that tragic link, that connection between pain and the desperate need for escape, it leads us right into the next major pathway to despair: addictions.
And you really can't talk about addictions today without confronting the opioid epidemic head-on. It's been this unfolding tragedy for far too long.
It really has. The impact on quality of life for, 2 generations now? It's profound. Plus the massive strain on public health, the economy.
The death toll is just horrific. Over 70,000 lives lost to opioids in the U.S. in 2017 alone.
70,000. That breaks down to 130 people dying every single day from an opioid overdose.
Just try to wrap your head around that. Every day.
It's a daily silent massacre, really. And the economic cost is also staggering: $78 billion back in 2013 alone, covering healthcare, lost work, treatment, justice system costs.
So how do we get here? The chapter breaks down the epidemic's evolution into 3 stages.
Right. Stage 1. Early 1990s. That's when prescription opioids really started being introduced widely for pain management.
Often with good intentions by doctors trying to help people in pain.
But we now know, tragically, the long-term consequences. The addictive potential was vastly underestimated or downplayed.
Then came stage 2, early 2010s. We saw this rapid, alarming spike in heroin overdose deaths.
Yeah, and that was largely driven by economics. Heroin became cheaper and much more potent, more concentrated.
So for people who got hooked on prescription pills but then couldn't get them anymore or couldn't afford them?
Heroin became the more accessible, though obviously much more dangerous, alternative. A grim evolution driven by market forces and addiction.
And then stage 3, post-2013. This is maybe the deadliest phase.
Arguably, yes. The surge in deaths from synthetic opioids, primarily fentanyl.
Which is incredibly powerful, right? Way more than heroin.
Orders of magnitude more powerful. Often leading to accidental, instant overdoses because people don't realize its strength, where it's mixed into other drugs without their knowledge.
And the scariest part, as the chapter really hammers home, is that this epidemic showed us that anyone can become a victim of substance abuse.
That's such a critical, uncomfortable truth. It shatters so many stereotypes about who addiction affects.
The chapter stresses it. Men across every economic class, religion, age, education level, and from every size community in the country.
Addiction truly does not discriminate, which means vigilance and understanding are vital for everyone.
And the trend specifically for men is alarming. Drug overdose death rates for men more than tripled between 1999 and 2018.
Tripled. From 8.2 per 100,000 up to 27.9 per 100,000. That's an explosion.
And there's a connection back to aging and pain again, isn't there? A specific age group seems particularly vulnerable.
Yes, the chapter points out a higher percentage of men age 55 and older are falling victim to opioid overdoses.
Which correlates directly with their higher rates of chronic disease and the chronic pain that often comes with it.
It's that tragic intersection again. Physical suffering meeting the desperate search for relief, which then leads down the path to addiction.
This seems like a good place to bring in that public health concept you mentioned earlier, DAILYs. Disability-adjusted life years.
Yeah, DAILYs. It sounds a bit technical, maybe esoteric, but it's really important for understanding the true scale of the loss here.
Okay, break it down for us. What exactly is a DAILY?
So a DAILY represents 1 year of healthy life that is lost. It's a way to measure the overall burden of disease or injury.
Lost how?
It combines two things. Years of life lost due to dying prematurely dying much earlier than expected,
Okay.
and years lived with a disability, which accounts for the time people spend living with the debilitating effects of an illness or injury, even if they don't die from it.
So it captures both early death and reduced quality of life due to health problems.
Exactly. It gives a much fuller picture of the impact than just looking at death rates alone.
The chapter gives an example to make it clearer, right?
It does. Imagine a 45-year-old man. Statistically, let's say he's expected to live to 78.
Okay.
If he tragically dies from a heroin overdose at 45, the DAILYs lost from that one death would be 33 years.
78 minus 45. 33 years of healthy, productive life just gone.
Instantly. Gone for him, his family, his community, society. It measures that loss potential starkly.
And when you apply that daily metric to the opioid crisis across the whole population, the numbers must be staggering.
They are absolutely dramatic. A stark warning. In 1990, men in the U.S. lost about 900,000 healthy years of life to drug abuse overall.
Okay, 900,000 years in 1990.
By 2017, that number had soared to 3.4 million years.
Wow. From 900,000 to 3.4 million healthy years lost for men due to drug abuse in just under 30 years.
It's a monumental loss of human potential, of well-being, of contribution. It represents countless stories like Richard's, lives cut short.
That number really puts the human cost in terrifying perspective, and this feels like the right moment to share that crucial resource again.
Absolutely. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, please remember SAMHSA.
That's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They offer a free confidential service 24/7.
The number is 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357.
Please use it. It's a lifeline. 1-800-662-HELP.
Now, beyond the devastation of opioids, there's another major pathway to despair the chapter covers: alcoholic liver disease.
And the trend here is also deeply concerning, right? Almost like we're going backwards.
Exactly. Mortality related to alcohol has actually reached levels we haven't seen in over a century.
A century, we're regressing on a major public health issue.
It suggests a profound shift in drinking patterns and the resulting consequences: chronic liver disease and cirrhosis, much of it driven by alcohol.
They account for 35,000 deaths every year in the U.S.
35,000. And what's so tragic is many people are dying from this severe, irreversible liver damage in their 50s and 60s.
Way too young. Lives cut short by what is often a preventable disease. Parents, partners, friends gone prematurely.
And again, there's a gender aspect. Over 2% of men in the U.S. have liver disease.
With the highest rates seen in men aged 45 to 75.
Right, in that same demographic wheelhouse, we keep coming back to the group also struggling with pain, economic issues, opioids.
And the death rate itself from chronic liver disease and cirrhosis in men has been climbing.
It has, from 12.4 per 100,000 in 2005 up to 14.5 per 100,000 in 2017.
And again, mirroring the other trends, the rates are drastically higher for non-Hispanic white men aged 45 to 54.
This consistent pattern across different diseases of despair really underscores the systemic nature of the problem. It's not just isolated issues.
Which leads us inevitably to the ultimate, most tragic expression of despair, suicide.
The statistics here are just stark, and they represent a silent crisis.
More than 123 people die by suicide every single day in the United States.
Let that number sink in. 123 lives lost daily, often hidden behind private grief.
And the gender disparity here is profound and deeply disturbing.
It really is. Men die by suicide at 3.5 times the rate of women.
3.5 times.
To put it another way, the chapter states 8 out of every 10 lives lost due to suicide are men.
8 out of 10, wow.
And again, reflecting the broader despair trend, middle-aged white men consistently show the highest suicide rates.
The chapter also mentions the method, which is grim but important.
Yes, over half of these suicides involve a firearm, pointing to the lethality and immediacy of the chosen method.
This forces us to look at some difficult but essential societal and cultural factors. The book talks about rugged individualism.
Yeah, that pervasive idea that men should just be tough, self-reliant, get over financial problems or emotional pain on their own.
Saw it up, don't complain.
Exactly, and that deeply ingrained belief, it contributes significantly to the underdiagnosis of mental health issues in men.
Because they're discouraged from seeking help, from admitting vulnerability.
Or even just acknowledging to themselves that they need support. That cultural pressure builds a wall around their suffering.
And we see this tragedy play out even with famous people, right? People who seem to have it all.
Absolutely. The chapter mentions Kurt Cobain, the musician, Chris Benoit, the pro wrestler, Anthony Bourdain, the beloved chef.
Just a few examples of incredibly successful, talented people who, despite everything they achieved,
tragically lost their lives to suicide. It's a devastating reminder that depression and suicidal thoughts can affect anyone, regardless of success, fame, anything. It crosses all boundaries.
So it's not just these big societal factors. There are individual contributors, too, that amplify the risk.
Definitely. The chapter points to things like legal and financial challenges. Think back to Richard's foreclosure again.
Yeah.
Concerns about physical health, like chronic pain or illness, even deep problems with intimacy and relationships. These all contribute significantly to depression and therefore to suicide risk.
It's this complex web of stressors that can just become overwhelming for someone.
Which makes recognizing the warning signs absolutely critical, potentially life-saving.
The chapter lists some key ones we should all know.
Yes. Things like a noticeable increase in drinking or drug use, losing interest in personal appearance, self-care,
withdrawing from work, from family, from social activities,
difficulty eating or sleeping, either too much or too little, and any drastic sudden changes in behavior or mood.
These are red flags, urgent signals that demand attention, either in yourself or someone you care about.
Absolutely, don't ignore them.
And unfortunately, the overall suicide rates, they're still climbing.
Consistently rising since 1999 in the U.S., from 10.5 per 100,000 up to 14 per 100,000 in 2017.
It's not a blip. It's a sustained, worrying upward trend.
And this rise, the chapter argues effectively, it's deeply connected to all those broader factors we've been discussing.
Economic stagnation, especially for those without college degrees, leading to that sense of lost hope, lost security.
The increase in alcohol and drug abuse, often used to self-medicate the underlying pain.
And something that's maybe overlooked but critical, social isolation.
Yes, the decrease in family connections, community involvement, those strong social ties, when those informal safety nets fray.
When people feel disconnected, alone in their struggles.
Despair finds much more fertile ground. That erosion of social capital is a huge contributing factor.
This feels like the moment, maybe the most critical moment, to share that other vital resource, the lifeline.
Absolutely essential. If you or anyone you know might be at risk of suicide, please know there is free, confidential help available 24/7.
It's the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. The number is 1-800-273-8255.
You'll connect with trained, compassionate professionals ready to provide immediate support.
That number again, 1-800-273-8255. Please reach out if you need it. Don't hesitate.
So, pulling all these threads together,
Mm.
how do we synthesize this? How do the authors explain this widespread despair in the 21st century?
They describe it as a kind of convergence of crises, right?
Right.
A perfect storm hitting vulnerable groups.
Exactly. First, you have the economic reality, baby boomers hitting retirement age, but many facing real financial anxiety.
Because wages have stagnated for decades, especially for those without higher education, the retirement nest egg just isn't there for many.
So dreams of a comfortable retirement are replaced by worry.
And that economic insecurity feeds right into that devastating health and poverty cycle we talked about.
Right, older men dealing with more chronic conditions, often including poorly managed pain.
Which leads to missed work, lost income, mounting medical bills.
Driving them deeper into financial hardship, which then worsens their health and mental state. A vicious downward spiral.
Incredibly difficult to escape once you're in it.
And then the next step in that tragic progression. As men become more isolated, disconnected from community, from social networks,
Those crucial support systems weaken.
they often turn to alcohol, prescription painkillers, or street opioids as a coping mechanism, or just to numb the pain, physical and emotional.
Which, of course, dramatically increases their risk for alcoholic liver disease, accidental overdose, and ultimately suicide.
When you put all those pieces together, economic hardship, chronic pain, addiction, social isolation, particularly hitting certain demographics.
It's not an exaggeration, as the chapter concludes, to call it a societal tragedy and a public health disaster.
It's a collective failure demanding a collective response.
So, given how serious this is, what's the path forward? What can we actually do?
The chapter is clear. Reversing this tide of despair requires a concerted, collaborative effort. It's not just one person's or one group's job.
It needs individuals taking action, families supporting each other, communities strengthening their bonds.
And government, at all levels, local, state, federal, working together seriously on solutions.
One crucial need highlighted is for strong safety nets, social and economic support structures.
Yes, to help those financially vulnerable men who are at higher risk. Buffers against the shocks and crises that can trigger despair.
But it's not just policy, right? It's personal, too.
Profoundly personal. A call for each of us to proactively help one another, to consciously build and strengthen social support networks.
Those connections, a call, a visit, just being present, listening, they're the antidote to isolation.
They're the fabric of resilience. We need to actively nurture those relationships in our own lives and communities.
And on the individual level, the message about seeking help is so important.
Cannot be overstated. It's an act of courage, never weakness.
And the book offers real hope here. It states that over 80% of people who seek therapy for depression are successfully treated.
That's a hugely powerful statistic. It should encourage anyone struggling to take that first step. Help is available, and it works. There is a path back to hope.
The urgency here is just undeniable. The human cost, the social cost to families, neighbors, workplaces, the entire country.
It's simply, as the chapter says, too high to ignore. This demands our collective attention, empathy, and immediate sustained action.
Wow. Okay. This deep dive into Chapter 65, Diseases of Despair, it's been heavy, definitely sobering, but so incredibly important.
It really has. We've tried to unpack those complex, interconnected factors, economic, physical, social, driving these alarming trends.
And hopefully highlighted the urgent need for awareness, for compassion, and for action from all of us.
And we hope this discussion has really underscored, again, the value of the 21st century man as a resource.
It's just an essential guide for understanding and navigating the challenges men face today, many of which fly under the radar.
Absolutely. We really do encourage you, grab the book, read it. It offers such comprehensive guidance, actionable wisdom. It's truly insightful.
It really can change your perspective and empower you. So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on.
Okay.
Considering how absolutely critical social connection is in fighting despair, maybe ask yourself, how can I, in my daily life, consciously work to strengthen my community ties, my personal relationships?
How can we each actively build and nurture those support networks that are so desperately needed right now?
Yeah. Something to reflect on. How can we be part of the solution?
A powerful question.
Well, please join us next time as we continue our journey through the 21st century man. We'll be diving into Chapter 66, Anxiety in Men.
Another crucial topic for modern male well-being. We'll break down insights and strategies there, too.
We look forward to having you with us then. Thanks so much for tuning in to this deep dive.
Take control of your health anytime, anywhere. Visit globalmenswellness.com and start your free trial today. Get expert-level answers in seconds, not weeks, without the cost, the wait, or the awkward conversations. Real support on your terms. Visit globalmenswellness.com now.